You remember the store, the one with the cracked yellow sign at the edge of the parking lot, the one your mother dragged you through on a Saturday morning, the one that always smelled like popcorn and cardboard. You drove past it last month, and the lot was empty. The letters were gone, just the ghost of them left behind on the brick. And some part of you knew, before you even slowed down, that it was never coming back. I'm telling you right now that what happened to that store is not an accident, and it is not the economy, and it is not your imagination. 12 of the biggest names in American retail are dying as I speak, and most of them will be gone or unrecognizable within a few short years. I know this because I spent more than 30 years inside this business, sitting in the rooms where they decided which towns lived and which towns died. So I'm going to count them down for you. 12 names, from the ones still pretending to be fine, all the way to the one at the very bottom that nobody in the press will say out loud. And the collapse sitting at number 1 involves a sale where a company worth $8.5 billion was dumped for $1 billion 10 years later by the same people who promised to save it. I watched that promise get made. Stay with me, because that last one will change how you see every empty storefront in this country. Let me start near the top, with a name you'd swear was still healthy. Kohl's. You probably shop there for back-to-school clothes. You probably have one of their coupons in a drawer right now. And on paper, Kohl's is still standing, with around 1,100 stores still open across the country. But I want you to look closer, because the cracks are deep. In the early part of 2025, Kohl's announced it was closing 27 stores, and that number is just the opening move. Same-store sales have been sliding for years now. Foot traffic keeps thinning out. But here's the part that told me everything. In May of 2025, the company fired its own chief executive, Ashley Buchanan, after only a few months on the job over a conflict of interest tied to deals with a personal business associate. When a company that's already wobbling has to throw out the very man brought in to fix it, that's not a stumble. That's a building with a bad foundation. I've seen that pattern before, and it never ends with a recovery. It ends with a liquidation sign in the window. And Kohl's, believe me, is the healthiest patient on this list. Therefore, if the strong ones look like this, you need to understand what's happening to the famous ones. Which brings me to Macy's. This is the store from the parade. The store with the wooden escalators and the Christmas windows that people used to take the train into the city just to see. For generations, Macy's was the anchor that held the whole shopping mall together. And now it's the one being pulled out by the roots. In February of 2024, Macy's announced a plan it dressed up with a hopeful little name, a so-called bold new chapter. Strip away the corporate language and here's what it actually meant. They are closing about 150 stores, roughly a third of everything they have, by the end of 2026. 150 Macy's? Gone. The stores your town built its entire downtown or its entire mall around. I sat through presentations exactly like the one that produced that plan. They never call it closing. They call it optimizing the fleet. They call it right-sizing the footprint. And every person in that room knows what those words mean for the cashier who's worked there for 22 years, and the food court 2 doors down that lives or dies on Macy's traffic. When the anchor leaves, the whole mall starts to bleed out. Therefore, the closing of one Macy's is never the closing of just one store. But a department store dying slowly is one thing. The next name was supposed to be untouchable. Foot Locker. The striped referee shirts. The wall of sneakers. For decades, this was where every kid in America begged their parents to spend money they didn't have. And in 2025, Foot Locker stopped being an independent company at all. Dick's Sporting Goods agreed to buy it for about $2.4 billion. Now, a buyout might sound like a rescue, and that's exactly how they want it to sound. But I've watched enough of these to tell you the truth. When a rival swallows you whole, they don't keep 2 stores open across the street from each other. They keep the strong locations, and they close the weak ones, quietly, a few at a time, so no headline ever captures the full damage. Foot Locker, as you knew it, the standalone chain with more than 2,400 stores at its peak, is functionally finished. The name might survive on a banner for a while. The company is gone. And here's what should bother you. None of these collapses are random. They share a bloodline, and I'm going to show it to you. Because the next one isn't a clothing store or a shoe store. It's the place you pick up your prescriptions, CVS. You have one within a few miles of your house right now. And back in 2021, CVS announced it would close 900 stores over 3 years. 900. They finished most of that purge by 2024, and they are not done. Think about what a drugstore closing actually means in a small town. It's not just shampoo and greeting cards. It's the pharmacy counter, where an 80-year-old woman picks up the heart medication that keeps her alive. When that closes, she doesn't have an inconvenience. She has a 40-minute drive she can't make. This is the thing the quarterly reports never say out loud. They report it as square footage reduction. I'm telling you, it's a map of abandoned neighborhoods, and CVS is still a giant, still profitable in places, still standing. So you'd think the pharmacy business was basically safe. Therefore, let me show you what happens when a pharmacy giant isn't safe at all. Walgreens, the other corner. The red script logo you've seen 10,000 times. For most of your life, Walgreens and CVS felt like two pillars that would hold up the sky forever. And then, in March of 2025, Walgreens agreed to be taken private in a deal worth around $10 billion. The buyer was an investment firm called Sycamore Partners. Now stop right there, because this is the moment the story changes. This is the name I told you to wait for. Sycamore Partners is not a drugstore company. They do not love your neighborhood. They are what's called a private equity firm, and I need you to understand exactly what that means, because this single mechanism is the thread that runs through almost every collapse on this list. Here is how the machine works. A private equity firm buys a struggling but still breathing company, and they don't buy it with their own money. They borrow most of it, and then they pile that borrowed debt onto the company they just bought. So, the patient is now responsible for paying back the loan that was used to purchase the patient. Then they sell off the most valuable parts, the real estate, the good locations, and they collect fees and dividends for themselves along the way. And when the company finally buckles under the debt that was strapped to its back, the firm has already pulled its money out. They win, whether you live or die. Walgreens had already announced it was closing about 1,200 stores over 3 years before that sale even closed. Now hand that wounded company to the people who profit from the carcass, and you tell me how this ends. I watched this exact playbook run on company after company from the inside, and I used to think the analysts were being dramatic. I was wrong. They were being kind. So now you know the weapon. From here down, every entry was hit with some version of it. And it only gets worse. And if you want to go deeper than a single video can take you, I've written all of this out in full. The books are called The Collapse, Dead Weight, and Collapse Cash, and together they walk you through the entire mechanism, the debt, the deals, the people who walked away rich, and what it means for every community left holding the empty building. You can find them linked in the description below. I wrote them because this story deserves more than a headline, and you deserve more than a press release. But let's get back to the list, because the names only get darker from here. Big Lots. The closeout store. The place where you found a recliner for $90 and a box of brand-name cereal for $1.29. Working families relied on Big Lots, and in September of 2024, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. At the time, it had around 960 stores. Here's the part that fits the pattern perfectly. Years before the bankruptcy, Big Lots had sold off hundreds of the buildings it actually owned in what they call a sale-leaseback. They took the real estate they owned free and clear, sold it for a cash injection that looked great on one quarter's report, and then turned around and started paying rent on the very buildings they used to own. It's like selling your house and then renting it back from the man who bought it. It feels like money today. It is a noose tomorrow. A buyer called Nexus Capital was supposed to ride in and save what was left. That deal nearly fell apart entirely, and in the end, a chunk of stores were rescued by a company called Variety Wholesalers, but hundreds of locations went dark for good. Whole communities lost the one affordable store they had. Therefore, when you see a going out of business banner, understand the building was often gambled away long before the doors closed. And if you so, the next one already broke your heart. Joann. For more than 80 years, Joann Fabrics was the place. If you quilted, if you knitted, if you made your kids' Halloween costumes by hand, this was your store. And for a lot of people, it was more than a store. It was the only place left that understood what they did. Joann filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in March of 2024. They restructured, they promised they'd be fine. And then, less than a year later, in January of 2025, they filed for bankruptcy again. 2 bankruptcies in under 12 months. In this business, we have a word for that. We call it a Chapter 22, and it almost always means the end, because it tells you the first rescue fixed nothing. Joann moved to liquidate, shutting down around 800 stores and letting go of tens of thousands of workers. And the reason traces straight back to a private equity firm called Leonard Green and Partners, which had owned Joann, loaded it with debt, taken its dividends, and left a company too weak to survive a single bad year. You see the pattern now. You can't unsee it. But Joann at least had real customers who loved it. The next one ran out of time in front of the whole country. Party City. Think about that. Birthday parties, graduations, Halloween, their single biggest season of the year. Party City was the largest party goods retailer in the nation, with around 700 stores. And in December of 2024, days before the holidays, the company told its corporate employees it was shutting down completely. By early 2025, every single store was closing. This was their second bankruptcy too. They'd filed once in 2023, wiped out around $1 billion in debt, and still couldn't survive, because the debt was never the disease, it was the symptom. The disease was an ownership structure that treated the company like a thing to be drained, not a business to be run. Imagine being a store manager and finding out on a Friday in December that the chain you gave 15 years to is liquidating everything before New Year's. That happened to real people. Therefore, I want you to hold on to that feeling, because now I need to turn this around and talk about you. Because so far you've been watching this like a news report about other people's jobs in other people's towns. I need you to understand it's about your money, your street, and your future. Right now. Here's what every one of these closures does to you directly. When a Macy's or a CVS or a Big Lots shuts its doors, the first thing that happens is competition disappears. And when competition disappears, the stores that are left stop fighting for your dollar. Prices go up. You've felt it already, haven't you? You've stood at a register and watched a number ring up that didn't make sense, and you told yourself it was just inflation. Some of it was, but some of it is this. Fewer stores means fewer choices, means whoever's left can charge whatever they want. The second thing that happens is your town's tax base craters. A big box store doesn't just employ people. It pays property taxes that fund your roads, your schools, your fire department. When it goes dark, that money vanishes, and the empty building sits there driving down the value of every home around it, including, very possibly, yours. A vacant anchor store is a wound that doesn't heal. It spreads. And the third thing, the one that hits hardest if you're in your 60s like me, is what it does to your sense of where you live. The places that held your memories are being hollowed out, one parking lot at a time, and the official story keeps telling you everything is fine, the consumer is strong, the economy is resilient. I sat in those meetings. I heard those exact words rehearsed before they were ever said to a camera. The good news in the press release is the costume. The closures are the body underneath. Now, if you've ever stood in an empty parking lot and felt like you were the only one who noticed something was deeply wrong, I'm telling you that you were right, and there are a lot of us. Keep that in mind, because the last 3 names are the proof. Number 4, the 99-cents only stores. For families stretching every dollar, this was a lifeline, especially across California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. And in 2024, the company announced it was closing all of its stores. Every single one. 371 locations. Gone. Just like that. And who had owned it? A private equity firm called Ares Management, along with a Canadian pension fund, had bought the chain back in 2011 for around $1.6 billion. They ran it through more than a decade of debt and pressure, and when it finally collapsed, the poorest shoppers in the Southwest lost the cheapest store they had in the exact years when they needed it most. That timing is not a coincidence. The people who can least afford to lose a store are always the first to lose one, because they were never the customer the owners actually cared about. Therefore, when the dollar store dies, look up. Somebody made their money already. Number 3, Rite Aid. And this one should genuinely frighten you, because it shows you the floor falling out twice. Rite Aid was once one of the 3 biggest drugstore chains in America, with thousands of stores. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in October of 2023, drowning in debt and lawsuits. It went through the whole painful restructuring, closed hundreds of stores, and swore it had turned the corner. And then, in May of 2025, Rite Aid filed for bankruptcy again, a second time, and this time, there was no grand survival plan. The company moved to sell off or close essentially all of its remaining stores, more than 1,000 of them, handing the prescription files of millions of Americans to whoever would take them. Think about that. An entire national pharmacy chain, a name your parents trusted, simply ceasing to exist, while the official statements talked about strategic alternatives and serving customers through the transition. I've decoded that language for you all night. You know what it means now, so we're down to the final 2. And I told you at the very start that the one at the bottom involves a company worth $8.5 billion, sold for $1 billion by the same people who swore they'd save it. To understand why that's the worst one, I have to give you number 2 first, because they are twins, and they died in the same bed. Number 2, Dollar General. Now you're going to argue with me, because Dollar General is everywhere. More than 19,000 stores, still opening new ones, still posting billions in sales. How can it be on a list of stores about to vanish? Here's how. In early 2024, Dollar General announced it was closing and converting around 1,000 stores, including hundreds under its own banner. A company that built its entire empire on relentless expansion, suddenly slamming on the brakes and pulling locations is not a healthy company. It's a company that grew faster than the towns underneath it could support, planting stores in places that were already drying up, and now it has to retreat. And the stores it's closing are in exactly the places that have nothing else, the rural crossroads. The forgotten county where the Dollar General was the last retailer standing after everything else already left. When that one closes, there is no number 2 store in that town. There is no store at all. That's not a market correction. That's a community losing its final lifeline. And it's a warning shot for what's coming across the whole dollar store world. Therefore, everything I just told you about Dollar General is the appetizer. Its sister chain is the main course, and it is the most shocking financial story on this entire list. Number 1, Family Dollar. And to tell you why this is the worst of them all, I have to take you back to 2015, into a deal I watched unfold with my own eyes. In 2015, Dollar Tree bought Family Dollar for about $8.5 billion. It was a massive deal, a triumphant deal, splashed across every business page. The promise was beautiful. 2 great American value chains, joining forces, becoming unstoppable, serving working families coast to coast. I remember the optimism. I remember people in my world nodding along, saying this was the future, this was smart money. And I'll admit it, I half believed it too. It was a disaster, almost from the start. The 2 chains never fit together. Family Dollar stores were run down, its locations troubled, its shelves a mess. Year after year, Dollar Tree poured money in and got heartbreak out. They closed hundreds of Family Dollar stores. At one point in 2024, they announced the closure of around 1,000 of them. And then they took the write-downs, the accounting admissions, that the business was worth far, far less than they paid. Those write-downs ran into the billions of dollars. They were publicly confessing, in their own filings, that the $8.5 billion prize had turned to ash. And here is the ending. Here is the number that should stop you cold. In 2025, Dollar Tree sold Family Dollar off to a pair of private equity firms, Brigade Capital Management and Macellum Capital Management, for a price of around $1 billion. Read that again. They bought it for $8.5 billion. They sold it for $1 billion, roughly $7.5 billion in value, simply destroyed, vaporized, in 10 years. Now think about what that means. That is not a store that failed because you stopped shopping there. Working families never stopped needing Family Dollar. That is a chain that was bought as a trophy, mismanaged from a boardroom, drained of its worth, and then dumped onto exactly the kind of financial owners who specialize in taking apart whatever's left. The same machine I showed you back with Walgreens and Sycamore, the same machine that gutted Joann in Party City and 99 cents only, has now closed its jaws around one of the last affordable stores in poor and rural America. And the people who will pay for it are the ones with the least to give. That's why it sits at number 1. Not because the most stores closed, but because it lays the whole scheme bare. A company can be worth $8.5 billion and $1 billion within a single decade, and the difference didn't disappear into thin air. It went into fees, into debt, into deals, into the pockets of people whose names you never knew, while you watched the parking lot near your house go quiet and wondered if it was just you. It was never just you. Every empty store you've driven past, every dark sign, every locked door with a paper notice taped to the glass is a place where someone made a fortune on the way down. The press release called it a transition. I'm calling it what it is. You are the kind of person who feels it in your gut when the good news on the screen doesn't match the boarded up windows on your own street. And tonight I've shown you the names and the numbers behind that feeling, so you'll never doubt it again. So let me ask you something, and I really want your answer. Of all 12 of these, which collapse hit you the hardest? Was it the Macy's where you bought your first suit? The Rite Aid that filled your prescriptions? The Family Dollar that got your family through the lean months? Tell me the store you personally watched disappear. Write it in the comments below, the name and the town, because I read them, and so do thousands of people who feel exactly the way you do. And if you want the truth about where this is really headed, instead of the version they rehearse for the cameras, then come stand with the rest of us, who refuse to be told everything is fine, while the country we remember gets sold off piece by piece. Subscribe and stay close. Because the next chains I'm tracking are 3 names you'd swear could never fall. And one of them just quietly took on a level of debt that I have only ever seen right before the very end. Remember that empty parking lot? Now you know why. That was just the overview. There's more I couldn't fit here. Inside the circle, I take you through the full empire collapse, every closing store named, right where this video stopped. And you can ask me anything, a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, 1 click, no risk. If you'd like to understand what's really happening to the stores and restaurants you grew up with, stay close. I keep sharing more right here, so subscribe and explore what's waiting for you.